imagine a cyber attack, right?
Yeah.
So big it cripples hospitals, like all at once, in multiple countries. Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, like a real thriller, huh?
But this is the kind of scenario that the EU is trying to prevent right now with this thing called the NIS2 Directive. And our listeners asked us to unpack this whole thing, so we dove straight into the source.
Straight to the source, yeah.
The official, the legal text. It's called CLEX_02 022L2555-2022127 _EN_TXT.PDF.
Oh, yeah, that one.
But we'll just call it the NIS2 Directive.
Much easier, yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's a dense read, for sure.
I bet.
But it's actually fascinating, how the EU is trying to level up cybersecurity across all 27 member states. Like, they're not just trying to, patch holes here and there. They're aiming for this whole new level of resilience.
Okay, so this directive goes way beyond the 2016 version. I mean, it makes you wonder. What's changed? Why is this such a huge priority all of a sudden?
Well, I think there's a growing recognition that cyber threats are evolving, rapidly evolving, and they're becoming much more sophisticated, much more interconnected.
Oh, for sure.
And you think about how much we all rely on these digital systems now.
For
everything. Healthcare, transportation, finance, you name it.
It's wild.
And so the potential for disruption is huge, even societal chaos.
Yeah, okay, so it's serious business. But who exactly does NIS2 apply to? Is it just tech companies and government agencies?
No, actually, it casts a much wider net than you might think.
Okay.
It covers public and private entities across a range of sectors that are deemed essential or important.
Okay.
So think energy, transport, banking, healthcare, digital infrastructure, basically anything that's really vital to society or the economy.
So pretty much any company that exceeds those medium-sized enterprise ceilings or provides critical services, right? I mean, that's a lot of ground to cover.
It is a lot. And here's where it gets really interesting. NIS2 even includes things like operators of recharging points for electric vehicles.
Wow.
So you think about it. If you have a widespread attack on EV charging stations, you could cripple transportation, impact the energy grid, even have a ripple effect on emergency services.
Oh, wow.
And that's why this directive is so comprehensive. It's recognizing these interconnected vulnerabilities that we might not even think about.
Wow, that's a great example of how these seemingly mundane things can suddenly become critical infrastructure. It really puts things into perspective. So if a company falls under NIS2, what are they actually required to do? Is it just a bunch of checklists and paperwork?
No, it's much more than that. NIS2 mandates this comprehensive approach to cybersecurity risk management. And this means establishing clear incident handling procedures, developing a robust business continuity and crisis management plan, and even ensuring the security of their supply chain.
Wow, so you can't just focus on your own internal systems. You have to consider the bigger picture. What about specific examples? Anything in the legal text that really jumped out at you?
Yeah, there are a few. For example, there are very specific rules for entities that provide domain name registration services.
Yep.
They're required to collect and maintain accurate registration data. That includes contact information for domain name holders.
Okay.
And this might sound really technical, but it's actually crucial for preventing things like website hijacking and phishing attacks. The stability and security of the entire domain name system, which we all rely on, depends on it.
Right. So it's not just about protecting your own little corner of the internet. It's about contributing to the security of the whole digital ecosystem.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway for our listeners. Think about your own work, your own industry. Could NIS2 apply to you? Even if you're not directly covered, your business partners, your clients, they might be, which could indirectly impact your operations. This directive has the potential to change the way we think about cybersecurity across the board.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about accountability. If things go wrong, who's ultimately responsible for making sure a company is compliant with NIS2? Is it just the IT department's headache?
Not anymore.
Okay.
NIS2 places a strong emphasis on governance, specifically targeting the management bodies of these essential and important entities.
Oh, yeah.
They are directly responsible for approving and overseeing these cybersecurity measures, and they can even be held liable for failures.
So no more passing the buck. The directive is really pushing for a top-down approach to cybersecurity.
It is. And it goes even further than that. There's a huge emphasis on training, not just for management, but for all employees.
Oh.
It's about creating this culture of cybersecurity awareness where everybody understands their role in protecting the organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have the best technology in the world, but if your people aren't trained to use it properly and to spot potential threats, it's all for nothing.
Absolutely. It's recognizing that human error is often the weakest link.
Oh, yeah.
By investing in training, building that culture of awareness, you're essentially strengthening the human firewall.
Speaking of firewalls, both literal and metaphorical, let's talk about cooperation and information sharing. I mean, cyber attacks can cross borders in an instant. So how does NIS2 address the need for this coordinated response, both within the EU and, internationally?
That's actually a really crucial aspect of this directive. NIS2 establishes several bodies and networks to facilitate that cooperation and information sharing. It's acknowledging that we're all in this together. No single country or organization can tackle these challenges alone.
Okay, let's break those down one by one.
Okay.
First, there's this thing called the Cooperation Group.
Right.
Tell us about them.
So think of them as the strategic brain trust for cybersecurity in the EU.
Okay.
It's composed of representatives from each member state, the European Commission, and NIS2, which is the EU Agency for Cybersecurity.
Gotcha.
They provide guidance, facilitate cooperation, and essentially act as this central hub for coordinating cybersecurity efforts across the entire union.
So they're the big picture thinkers. Then we have the CSIRTs network. What do they do?
So the CSIRT network, which stands for Computer Security Incident Response Teams, is all about rapid response.
Okay.
Each member state has its own national CSIRT, and they're responsible for handling cybersecurity incidents, exchanging information quickly and effectively, and coordinating response efforts across borders.
So if there's a major cyber attack that impacts multiple countries, the CSIRTs are the ones on the front lines, coordinating the response, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And for those really big, large-scale incidents that require EU-level coordination, there's EU Cyclone, the European Cyber Crisis Liaison Organization Network.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is.
But it helps to ensure this unified and effective response to major cyber threats.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the strategic thinkers, the rapid responders.
Yeah.
But what about the everyday sharing of information? The kind that could prevent those big attacks in the first place. Does NIS2 address that?
It does. It strongly encourages voluntary information sharing among entities.
Okay.
It's like, think of it as a neighborhood watch for cybersecurity. If a company spots a new type of malware, discovers a vulnerability in their systems, sharing that information with others can help prevent those threats from spreading.
Right, like a collective immune system for the digital world.
Exactly.
The more we share information about these potential threats, the better equipped we are to defend against them.
Right. And that kind of collaborative approach is essential in today's interconnected world. We're all part of the same digital ecosystem. A threat to one can quickly become a threat to all.
All right. This all sounds great on paper, but how do we know companies are actually going to follow these rules? Are there real consequences for those who don't comply with NIS2?
Absolutely. The directive has teeth, and we'll dive into those in the next part.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already, so let's take a pause here and come back in part 2 to explore what happens when those red lines are crossed and what kind of impact NIS2 could have on the future of cybersecurity.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Until then, think about this. Could your business be affected by NIS2, even indirectly? It's worth considering because the reach of this directive is far greater than most people realize.
Welcome back. Last time we talked about, who NIS2 applies to and why it's such a big deal. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts. Like, what does compliance actually look like? What are companies supposed to do to meet these new cybersecurity standards?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Article 21 of the directive, it outlines these core cybersecurity risk management measures. And they're designed to be, pretty comprehensive, covering everything from technical systems to human behavior.
Okay, so it's not just about installing the latest antivirus software and calling it a day.
No, not even close. NIS2 takes this much more holistic approach.
Okay.
It recognizes that cybersecurity isn't just about technology. It emphasizes 3 key dimensions: technical, operational, and organizational measures. They want companies to bake security into their DNA.
So it's about building a culture of security from the ground up. What are some of the specific things companies are required to do?
Well, the directive, it lists 10 key areas,
Yeah.
starting with policies on risk analysis and information system security.
Okay.
So it's about understanding your own vulnerabilities, like what assets are most critical to your operations and what threats you're most likely to face. You have to know yourself and your enemy.
It's like a cybersecurity version of Sun Tzu's Art of War, right?
Exactly.
Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know the battlefield.
And once you have that understanding, you need to develop appropriate cybersecurity policies. Then the directive gets into incident handling,
Okay.
which is all about having clear procedures in place for detecting, responding to, and recovering from these cybersecurity incidents.
Right.
It's about being prepared, not just reacting in panic mode when something bad happens.
Right. Having a plan is crucial. I mean, it can be the difference between, a minor inconvenience and a full-blown disaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else is on the list?
Well, next is business continuity and crisis management.
Okay.
So this means being prepared for disruptions, whether it's a cyber attack or a natural disaster. Think backup systems, disaster recovery plans, communication strategies. You need to be able to keep your essential services running even when the unexpected happens.
It's almost like prepping for, a worst-case scenario, but for your digital world.
Yeah.
Like you're making sure you can weather the storm no matter what form it takes.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And then there's supply chain security. In today's interconnected world, the security of your suppliers and service providers is just as important as your own.
So you can't just assume that everyone else has their, cybersecurity ducks in a row.
Yeah.
You need to actively assess their practices and make sure they're meeting appropriate standards.
Exactly. A weak link in your supply chain can expose your entire organization to risk, and it gets even more granular. There are specific requirements for things like cryptography, secure communication channels, physical security of network equipment. It's incredibly detailed.
It sounds like the EU is leaving no stone unturned. But does NIS2 actually dictate specific technical solutions? Or does it leave room for, flexibility and innovation?
It's a bit of both. While the directive lays out the goals and principles, it recognizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Technology is constantly evolving, and the directive is designed to be adaptable.
So it's about setting a high bar for security without stifling, creativity or innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember that these measures are meant to evolve over time as the cyber threat landscape changes and new technologies emerge. It's an ongoing process of adaptation and improvement.
Speaking of evolution, Article 25 specifically mentions standardization. What role do standards play in NIS2? Why are they so important?
So standards are crucial for ensuring this consistent level of security across different organizations and sectors.
Okay.
They provide this common language and a set of best practices that everyone can follow.
Right.
Which simplifies implementation, makes it easier for companies to assess each other's security posture.
It's like having a shared blueprint for building secure systems, right? Instead of each company reinventing the wheel, they can rely on established standards that have been, vetted by experts.
Exactly. And the directive encourages the use of existing European and international standards whenever possible.
Yeah.
If no appropriate standards exist for a particular area, NISA can step in and provide guidance on developing new ones.
So it's a collaborative process. It's not just the EU, dictating from on high. It's about working with industry and international partners to develop standards that are practical and effective.
Exactly. It's about creating this shared ecosystem of security where everyone's speaking the same language, working towards the same goal.
Okay, we've talked about the requirements, the emphasis on standards, the collaborative approach. But let's get real for a minute. Are there any potential downsides to NIS2? Any concerns that businesses might have about these new regulations?
That's a great question. And, any major policy shift will inevitably have its critics.
Sure.
Some argue that the directive could stifle innovation by imposing too much regulation, or that the cost of compliance could be burdensome, especially for smaller businesses.
Right. So it's that classic debate between security and flexibility. How do you strike that balance between protecting critical infrastructure without creating an unreasonable burden on businesses?
It's a valid concern, and the directive does acknowledge the need for proportionality. The requirements are tailored to the size and risk profile of each entity, so smaller businesses with less sensitive data won't be subject to the same level of scrutiny as, say, a major energy provider.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
There's some built-in flexibility to account for the different needs and resources of various organizations.
Exactly. And there are provisions for adaptation as new technologies emerge. The goal is to strike that balance between security and innovation, recognizing that both are essential for a thriving digital economy.
All right, we've covered the risk management measures themselves, but what about reporting?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when a company experiences a cybersecurity incident? Do they just sweep it under the rug, or are there like specific reporting obligations?
That's where Article 23 of the Directive comes in. It outlines very specific reporting obligations for essential and important entities when they experience what's called a significant incident.
Okay, so not just any little glitch or, technical hiccup. What qualifies as a significant incident under NIS2?
So there are two main criteria. First, the incident must have caused or be capable of causing severe operational disruption of the entity's services or significant financial loss.
Okay.
And second, it must have affected or be capable of affecting other individuals or organizations by causing considerable material or non-material damage.
So if a cyber attack shuts down a hospital's computer systems or compromises patient data, that would definitely qualify. It's about those incidents that have the potential for real-world harm.
Exactly.
Either to the organization itself or to others.
Right. And the reporting requirements are quite specific. Entities need to provide an early warning to their designated CSR or competent authority within 24 hours of becoming aware of the incident.
So it's about getting the word out quickly. No time for delays or trying to downplay the situation.
Right. And then, within 72 hours, they need to submit a more detailed incident notification that includes a comprehensive assessment of the impact, potential root causes, and any mitigation measures that have been taken.
So it's about transparency and accountability. You can't just brush a significant cybersecurity incident under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
You have to own it, report it, and work with the authorities to address it.
Exactly. And the goal is not just to contain the immediate damage, but also to share lessons learned and improve overall cybersecurity preparedness. By analyzing these incidents and understanding how they happened, we can collectively raise the bar for security and make it harder for attackers to succeed in the future.
This all makes sense, but I'm sure some companies are worried about, confidentiality. What's to stop sensitive information about their systems or vulnerabilities from being leaked or misused if they have to report every significant incident?
That's a valid concern, and NIS2 addresses it directly. The directive emphasizes the need to protect the security and commercial interests of entities, as well as the confidentiality of the information provided during incident reporting.
So there are safeguards in place to prevent, sensitive information from falling into the wrong hands.
Absolutely. The information sharing is done in a way that preserves confidentiality, and there are strict rules about who can access the reported data. It's about finding that balance between transparency and protecting legitimate business interests.
It sounds like the EU has put a lot of thought into addressing those concerns and making sure that the reporting process is both, effective and secure.
They definitely have. And remember, this is all part of this larger effort to create a more resilient and secure digital landscape across the European Union.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in part two, from the specifics of risk management to the intricacies of incident reporting. It's clear that NIS2 is this complex and far-reaching piece of legislation. But what does it all mean in the grand scheme of things? What are the potential implications of this directive, not just for the EU, but for the future of cybersecurity globally? We'll tackle those big questions in part 3.
Yeah, join us then. We'll be exploring the enforcement mechanisms of NIS2 and discussing those potential ripple effects this directive could have on cybersecurity worldwide.
All right, welcome back. So we've made it to the final part of our deep dive into the NIS2 directive. And, we've talked about who it applies to, why it's such a big deal, all those requirements for compliance, all that stuff.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But now it's time to, address the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
What happens when companies just don't play by the rules?
Well, that's where the real teeth of this directive come in.
Okay.
NIS2 isn't just a set of, guidelines or suggestions. It comes with some serious enforcement mechanisms to make sure that those cybersecurity obligations are actually taken seriously.
So it's not just a slap on the wrist if a company gets caught cutting corners.
No, not at all. The directive, it draws a distinction between essential and important entities, and the level of scrutiny kind of varies accordingly.
Right, because those essential entities are the ones operating in those, absolutely critical sectors, right?
Exactly.
Where disruption could have the most, widespread impact. We're talking energy grids, healthcare systems, major financial institutions.
Right, and so for those essential entities, NIS2 mandates proactive, ongoing supervision
Okay.
by these competent authorities.
Okay.
And it's not just a wait-and-see approach, right?
Yeah.
They're actively monitoring, making sure that those entities are keeping up with their security obligations.
So what does that proactive supervision actually look like? Like, what kind of powers do these competent authorities actually have?
Well, they have a pretty wide range of tools at their disposal.
Okay.
They can conduct on-site inspections, demand security audits, request access to data and documentation. They can even carry out security scans of an entity's systems.
Oh, wow.
It's about, making sure those security measures are not just on paper,
Yeah.
but actually implemented and effective.
That sounds pretty thorough.
It is?
So what about those important entities?
Mm-hmm.
Do they get a little bit more leeway?
They do. While they're not subject to that same level of constant proactive supervision,
Okay.
competent authorities can still step in, if they receive evidence or some kind of indication of noncompliance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a reactive approach. But the enforcement measures themselves are actually pretty similar for both essential and important entities.
Yeah. So let's talk about consequences.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when a company is found to be, like, non-compliant with NIS2? What are we talking about here?
Well, the consequences, they can range from, like, a warning to a pretty hefty fine,
Okay.
depending on the severity of the infringement. Competent authorities can issue these binding instructions, order remedial actions, or even force a company to, make details of their noncompliance public.
Like public shaming. That's got to be a hit to a company's reputation.
Yeah.
Especially these days where, like, cybersecurity breaches are constantly making headlines.
Yeah, reputation is a powerful motivator, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
And then there are the fines themselves.
Yeah.
Which are nothing to sneeze at.
I bet.
For those essential entities, those fines can reach up to 10 million.
Wow.
Or 2% of their global turnover, whichever is higher. And for important entities, the maximum is 7 million,
Okay.
or 1.4% of turnover.
Ouch. Those are some serious numbers. But, it's not just about punishing companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's also this emphasis on learning from those mistakes and continuously improving cybersecurity practices, right? Across the board.
Absolutely. NIS2, it really encourages a culture of continuous improvement. There are provisions for sharing information about incidents and vulnerabilities, both within and between member states. It's recognizing that we're all stronger when we, work together, learn from each other's experiences.
Right. And there's that peer review mechanism we touched on earlier where, like, cybersecurity experts from different member states can evaluate each other's implementation and share best practices.
Exactly. It's about fostering the sense of, like, collective responsibility, making sure everyone's pulling their weight when it comes to cybersecurity.
Okay, so we've got the rules, the oversight, the consequences.
Right.
But what's the, like, big picture takeaway here? What does NIS2 really mean for the future of cybersecurity, not just in Europe, but, globally?
I think it represents a pretty significant step forward.
Okay.
It sets a new standard for cybersecurity legislation that's, comprehensive, adaptable, and most importantly, enforceable. It's a clear signal that the EU is taking cybersecurity seriously and setting a high bar for, the rest of the world.
So could this, like, inspire similar efforts in other regions? Could we see this, like, more harmonized approach to cybersecurity worldwide? Or will this lead to more fragmentation?
Yeah.
With different countries setting their own rules.
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
NIS2 is definitely being watched, very closely by governments and organizations all over the world. It could very well serve as a model for future cybersecurity legislation, which could lead to greater cooperation and, a more robust global cybersecurity posture.
But there's also that potential downside, right? That this could lead to, like, a more fractured landscape with all these conflicting regulations and compliance headaches for businesses that are operating across borders.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And finding that right balance between, national security interests and the free flow of data and services, it's going to be a key challenge in the coming years. It's something that, policymakers are going to have to address really carefully as they grapple with this, constantly evolving nature of cyber threats.
Lots to think about as we navigate this increasingly complex digital world.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts for our listeners as they, wrap their heads around NIS2 and its implications?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway is that cybersecurity is no longer just an IT issue. It's a business imperative, it's a societal concern, and it's something that really does affect all of us. NIS2 is kind of a wake-up call for organizations of all sizes to take cybersecurity seriously. And it's not just about, ticking boxes, checking compliance lists. It's
Yeah.
about building this culture of security awareness,
Yeah.
and resilience, where everyone understands their role in protecting themselves and their organizations from these cyber threats.
Wise words. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive into the NIS2 directive. We hope you found this exploration insightful and maybe even a little bit thought-provoking.
Yeah, the conversation definitely doesn't end here.
Absolutely.
Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay secure.
Until next time.